What's up? What's up? Hope everyone's doing great. Let's rock out another video here for you rock stars. And today we're going to talk about squares and square roots. More particular, perfect squares and square roots. You know, I learned a lot about these and I study with a bunch of astronauts. And I want you to understand that astronauts go to a very special university. It's called a mooniversity. Mooniversity. Apparently, I can't say mooniversity. That's actually the joke of the day, mooniversity. All right, let's talk about square roots and perfect squares. That's your goal for today, is to understand them and determine what the square roots of perfect squares and then the perfect squares and their relationship between the two. So I think you'll find this pretty interesting, or actually pretty easy if you have an understanding of perfect squares from a previous video or a previous math class. So let's dive in. Let's talk vocab first. All right. So we're going to talk about square roots. A square root is a number. A square root of a number is a value. So it's a value. Whoops. Okay, it's the square root of a number is the value that when multiplied by itself. That's kind of the key of for the square root definition. Multiplied by itself gives the number. So let's look at the symbol real quick. Whenever you see this symbol, so it'll look a little bit like this, and there'll be a number inside, okay? And it might be 81. And what they're trying to tell you is if something asks you to give the square root, so when you see this term or that symbol, say square root, if someone's saying, give me the square root of 81, they're asking you to find the number that when it's multiplied by itself will give you that number. Okay? So for 81, what number multiplied by itself? So it can't be 7 times 8. It has to be 8 times 8 or 7 times 7. It has to be the same number. What number multiplied by itself equals 81? And if you're good with times tables and you've been around perfect squares for a while, you'll know that that number is 9 times 9. And so the square root of 81 is actually 9. And that's the answer. You don't have to say 9 times 9. You just say what that value is. Okay? So the other example they're giving us is 4 times 4 is 16. So the square root of 16, in other words, what's the number that multiplied by itself equals 16, is 4. All right. So this is a little bit of a review, but let's just make sure we understand what perfect squares are, right? Perfect squares are the numbers that came about by multiplying a whole number by itself. So let's look at 10. What times itself equals 10? Well, let's start with our smallest of whole numbers. 1 times 1 is what? 1. 2 times 2, 4. 3 times 3, 9. We're getting close. 4 times 4, 16. So there isn't a whole number that multiplies together to equal 10, so it is not a perfect square. Okay? What about 28? Let's keep going. We said 4 times 4 is 16. What's 5 times 5? 25. All right, we're getting close. 6 times 6? 36. Well, that doesn't work because it's in between 25 and 36, so it would have to be a decimal that would get you there. All right, let's keep going. 6 times 6 we said is 36. 7 times 7 is what? 49. 8 times 8 is what? 64. Da-da-da. Okay? And then it gets harder as you get going. And I've said in previous videos that understanding perfect squares up to 400 is a great idea. Because basically when you get to 400, that means you're saying 20 times 20 equals 400. And you start at the top with 1 times 1 equals 1. And you need to probably memorize or just have a good understanding of how to find these answers pretty quickly if you want to figure out if something's a perfect square. But I also have a couple hints for you. Okay, so let's say you know your times table is pretty good up to 9, or you know your perfect square is up to 10, I should say, because 10 times 10 is 100. All right, so if we're saying, we understand the perfect squares of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Because we just went over those while we were checking for 64, right? We said 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, 5 times 5 is 25, 8 times 8 is 64, and then we said 9 times 9 is 81, and then 10 times 10 is 100. So if you know those, the hint that I'm going to give you is use the answers to the 1 through 10 to help you get the bigger numbers. So in other words, this one is 163. So in any of our 1 through 10, do we have any of them that give us an answer where the last digit is 3, like 163? So I'm going to write the perfect squares up here real quick for the first 10. So we have 1, and then we have 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 4 is 16, 5 times 5 is 25, 6 times 6 is 36, 7 times 7 is 49, 8 times 8 is 64, 9 times 9 is 81, and 10 times 10 is 100, okay? And underneath them, real quick, I'm just going to write in the number that we multiplied by to get those, okay? Just for ease of us understanding as we go forward with this. And as you get going with these, it may be a good idea just to write this down as you're doing these problems each time, because it'll make your life a little easier, and I'll show you. So when we multiply with these 4 digits in particular, do we have any of the answers that end in 3? And the answer is no. So this one ends in 1, 4, 9. This one ends in 6. This ends in 5. This ends in 6. This ends in 9. This ends in 4. This ends in 1. So this one cannot be a perfect square because no numbers multiplied together will end in a 3. Do we have any that end in a 0? Yes, we do. All right. So then we can try different numbers that end in 0. Well, 10 times 10 is what? 10 times 10 is 100. Whoops, 100. Well, let's try the next one that ends in a 0. That would be 20 times 20. And I just showed you a little while ago that equals 400. So that one will not work because we're trying to get to 200. So there's no other numbers that multiply together that will end in a 5 by itself. As you look at above, you'll see that. Okay? So that one will not work. All right? And let's see. The next one is what? 265. Do we have any numbers that when multiplied together end in a 5? Yes, we do. We have 5 times 5 equals 25. Well, 5 times 5 equals 25. That does not equal 265. But what's the next one that ends in 5? You're right, 15 times 15. So let's solve that. All right, so what is 15 times 15? 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 1 is 5 plus 2 is 7. Put your 0 here. And then 1 times 15 is 15. And if we add those up, I'll go ahead and give you the answer over here. It equals 225. Well, that doesn't work, right? And now we're down to one last chance, the one that ends in a 1. Do we have any that end in a 1? Well, yes, we do. We know that we know that 9 times 9 gives us 81. So we have a chance for a number that ends in 9 to equal 361. Well, what's the next number that ends in 9? That would be 19 times 19. So let's solve that and see what happens. 8 times 8 is 81. 9 times 1 is 9 plus 8 is 17. Put your 0 here. And then 1 times 19 is 19. And let's add those up. 1 plus 0 is 1. 7 plus 9 is 16. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. So this one works. It is a perfect square because it would be a square that would be 19 across the top and 19 going up and down, which would equal 361. So that's how you find perfect squares, okay? Now, you probably throughout that whole process started to see a relationship between square root and perfect squares. Perfect squares are whole numbers multiplied together to equal the value, and the square root of a perfect square is what is that number that was multiplied together to get us there. Okay, so let's fill out a little chart here and see if we can understand the relationship a little better. What is the square root of our perfect square 4? In other words, what number times itself equals 4? Well, what times what is 4? 2. 2 times 2 equals 4. On this side, they give us the square root, and they want us to know the perfect square. So the square root means we have a square, and one side is 3, which means the other side is 3. So what does that make the perfect square? 9. Fill out the rest of this chart and see if you can figure out what the square roots and perfect squares are, and then we'll go over it together. Pause the video if you need to. Okay, let's look at 16. What is the square root of 16? In other words, we have a perfect square that has 16 in the middle. What number times itself equals 16? That would be 4. What number times itself equals 121? Again, this is a timetable thing. but we know all the way up to 10. 10 times 10 is 100. What's 11 times 11? Well, 11 times 11 is 121. We just did 15 by 15 on the last slide, but if you multiplied it, we want to know what square has 15 up and 15 across. What would that equal? It's 225. And then 400, what number times itself equals 400? This is one of those that's kind of easy to memorize because, you know, you got two zeros and you got 20 times 20 equals 400 and 2 times 2 is 4. So this one is 400. Most people, when they're remembering their perfect squares and square roots, this is one of the easy ones. The first 10 are easy, and then it's a little harder to memorize 11, 12, 13, all the way up to 19. But 20 times 20 is 400. Good job. Looking at this question, what is the square root of 9? Go ahead and figure out what that is. Well, what does that mean? What number, when you see square root, all it's asking is what times what gives us that number inside the square root symbol. And that would be 3 times 3. Good. What is the square root of 16? Sometimes they don't give you the symbol, they put it in words. So what they're saying is, what is the square root of 16? What do you think? Well, what times what equals 16? 4 times 4 equals 16. Crushing it. Crushing it. And then a little bit harder, which of the following represents a square root of 196? Now remember, we can go back and look at those values of single digits, if you don't have this memorized, single digits that will give us a number at the end that ends in 6. Okay? So if it's what of our numbers end in 6? Well, what is 3 times 3 is going to end in what? 9. That's a 6. That will not work. 4 times 4 is 16. 6, 6. That could work. 5 times 5 is 25. That will not work. And 6 times 6 is 36. 6. So it's going to be one of those two numbers, okay? So it's either going to be 14 or 16 because they're the only values that will get us to 196. So let's try one. Let's try 14 times 14. Okay, 4 times 4 is 16. See that 6 already showed up? 4 times 1 is 4 plus 1 is 5. 0. What's 1 times 14? 14. Add them up and you get 6, 9, 1. 14 times 14 equals 196. So once you understand the relationship between the two, it makes life a little bit easier. I challenge you to try to memorize the 1 through 20. It will just help you in your years going forward of understanding what perfect squares are. I'm not asking you to know your 19 times tables. I'm just asking you to know 1 through 20 when they multiply by themselves. So it's really, you already know quite a few of them between 1 and 10. Can you memorize the last 9 or 10? All right. I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. I hope you learned a lot. And I hope to see you back here soon so we can hang out like the math rock stars that you are. Mooniversity.